the largest Jewish resistance against Nazi Germany. And people forget the largest resistance movement was, by principle, an anarchist resistance. This does not mean, however, that the people who were part of this resistance were anarchists. What I'm saying is that in practice, they were consistent with anarchist principles, even if they themselves do not subscribe to the idea of anarchism. Jewish armed anti-Nazi resistance. When the Nazi Empire exterminated 5 to 6 million European Jews in the 1930s and 40s, a minority of the victims took up arms and fought back. Armed Jewish resistors in Europe number in tens of thousands. This include fighters in the ghettos, in the forests, and even in extermination camps. Acting autonomously from the official Jewish leadership, armed Jewish cells killed Nazi soldiers, allowed many Jews to escape slaughter, and succeed in shutting down the Sobibor and the Treblinka extermination camps. These Jews committing to resistance in circumstances among the very direst in human history has inspired freedom fighters in subsequent generations. In other words, of historian Yehuda Baul, the Jewish resistors were able to choose resistance over helpless despair, life over death. Jewish resistance groups ranged in ideology and structure. One prominent movement was the Jewish Socialist Bund, which was social democratic and anti-Zionist. Other Jewish resistors were communists and Zionists. Some Jews remained outside all of these ideologies. Some battles, such as the 1943 Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, saw collaboration between highly structured units and spontaneous informal fighting formations. Jews fought alongside anarchists, among others, in the 1944 Warsaw Uprising. Even in the dire circumstances, Jews fought back and temporarily slowed down the Nazi genocide. Resistance in the ghettos. Forced to move in the wall-off, crowded, disease-ridden ghettos, Jews organized underground schools, social services, and synagogues. A minority also took up arms. In Eastern Europe, at least 40 ghettos had armed units. Sometimes, young ghetto residents acted as individuals or small groups to conduct major acts of sabotage. The 19-year-old Jewish woman, Vita Kempner, conducted Lithuania's first act of open anti-Nazi sabotage when she blew up a German train on July 8, 1942. In September 1942, Jewish communists and Zionists sabotaged a railroad line, attacked buildings, and assassinated German officials. In the summer of 1943, a 12-year-old boy named Motele Posset was begging a street violinist when a German officer hired him to perform at a restaurant full of German soldiers. The boy waited until the restaurant was high-ranking officers, and he set up a dynamite he had smuggled. Motele escaped through a prepared route. In other times, a highly coordinated revolt took place inside the ghettos themselves. On 16 August 1943, an armed revolt broke out in the Pelstock ghetto, led by Mordechai Tenenbaum. It involved a day of open fighting and then a week of guerrilla warfare. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. The Jews' largest ghetto uprising occurred in the Warsaw Ghetto. There, a social democrat and anti-Zionist movement called the Jewish Socialist Bund had been printed in a newspaper and running school to preserve Yiddish language culture and teach Jews how to work in new trades and promote political consciousness. The Bund adopted the slogan, "Resistant to death, armed." The Bund partnered with the communists and socialist Zionists to form the Jewish Fighting Organization. Some prominent Bundans did not strictly adhere to the organization's Marxist ideology. The military commander Berek Snadmil exposed of socialism that was romantic. He had no interest in weighty Marxist economic doctrines. Another commander, Abrasha Blum, was more humanist than Marxist. He saw not only the mass but the individual. Although the COB was the fiery top-down military, General Buell explained that after the first few days of fighting, militants became increasingly isolated from the command post. At Miller Street 18, and had to act on their own at night. The Bundesfighter Market Elderman reported that in order to organize, psychological difficulties had to overcome. He elaborated, to overcome our own terrified apathy, to force ourselves to the smallest spark of activity to fight against our own acceptance of the generally prevailing feeling of panic. Even these small tasks require truly gigantic efforts in our part. Jews dug extensive underground tunnels between apartments so that one could travel a square block without going outside. The non-Jewish Polish resistance provided only 10 pistols to the ghetto Jewish fighters, even though Polish residents had thousands of rifles and pistols along with tens of thousands of grenades. The historian Enzo Travis Dolaman wrote, "The non-Jewish Polish partisans never tried to interfere with the deportations or sabotage the railway line, or with the convoys to Treblinka traveled. Their perception of the Jews as foreigners, the result of a long history of separation and anti-Semitism, did not encourage solidarity action either. The Jews were not Poles, and their segregation did not appear as intolerable discrimination measure. While the Warsaw Ghetto burned, life went on in the Aryan sector of the capital." End quote. On January 18, 1943, Nazis entered the ghetto for deportations. 4 Jewish battle groups fired back and killed about 20 Nazis. The Nazis entered the raid early after deporting a few thousand Jews. One of the eve of April 1943 Warsaw Ghetto uprising, the COB was divided into 22 battle groups comprised of men and women between the age of 18 and 25. Another major fighting Jewish force was the right-leaning Jewish Military Union. According to the COP militant Marek Eldoman, the COP had about 220 fighters. According to his recollection, Eldoman, at the age of 22, was the oldest of the 5 commanders. All 5 had combined age of 110 years old. Barrow estimated the COP had between 250 and 300 members. Additionally, a revisionist Zionist militia, which the COP leaders considered to be fascist, had about 120 to 130 members. This makes a total number of 370 to 430 fighters. And 2 in the morning, on April 19, 1943, Nazi soldiers entered the ghetto in order to entirely liquidate it. Acting in self-defense, the COP militants opened fire at the soldiers and burned a Nazi tank using an incendiary cocktail. Jews hurled grenades, bombs, and dynamite at Nazi soldiers. Fighting continued for many hours. According to Elderman, German death soon littered the street. At 2 p.m., not a single live German remained in the ghetto area. It was the COP's first complete victory over the Germans, but the Germans returned the next afternoon. The fighting continued for weeks, and the Nazis employed a scorched earth strategy of setting the whole ghetto up in flames. Jewish battle groups became isolated from each other. Resistance spread from the COP to the masses of ghetto residents. Bundes fighter Bernard Gunsti wrote, and I quote, "With revolvers, grenades, and incendiary bottles in their hands, with handkerchiefs over their mouths, all fighters fought back against the overpowering force of the enemy armed with the most modern and efficient modern tools. Every maintaining inhabitant of the ghetto, without exception, was now drawn into the battle. Literally everyone, young and old. The Jews eventually ran out of ammunition, so many of their members either going up in flames with the rest of the ghetto or commit suicide to avoid the fate. With the assistance of the Polish resistance, some Jews escaped through the sewers and brought their trucks to hiding places in the forest. About 75 COP members escaped through the sewers on May 10, 1943. At the end of the revolt, the ghetto's roughly 50,000 survivors were deported to Treblinka, and other camps where all but a few thousand were killed. According to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, in addition to the Jews killed during the uprising, and I quote, "the German authorities deported approximately another 7,000 Warsaw Jews to the Treblinka killing center, where almost all were killed. In the gas chambers upon arrival, the Germans deported almost all of the remaining Jews, approximately 42,000, to the Lublin/Majdanek concentration camp, and to the Poniatowa, Czarnki, Botzing, and Krasnik forced labor camps, with the exception of the few thousand forced laborers at Busning and Krasnik. German SS and police units later murdered almost all of the Warsaw Jews deported to Lublin and Majdanek, Poniatowa, and Czarnki on November 43 in Operation Harvest Festival." End quote. Unconvincingly, then anarchist author Derek Jensen claimed in an essay published by AK Press that the Jews who participated in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, including those who went on what they thought were suicide missions, had a higher rate of survival than those who went alone. In the email exchange, Jensen clarified that about a tenth survived of the several thousand who joined the fighting in some sense or another, compared to the ghetto's overall 5% survival rate. Although Jensen declined to provide any source, the 5% figure is correct. Of the Warsaw ghetto's 400,000 residents, no more than 20,000 or 5% survived the Holocaust. Given that about 75 of the 370 to 450 fighters escaped through the ghetto through the sewer, it can be claimed that the armed military had at least a 17% survival rate. However, there was apparently not such a high survival rate among the several thousands who in 70% on Gottestein's recollection. As well as Jensen's narrative participate in some form. Jensen's estimate is contradicted by the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum report that only a few thousand of the ghetto's 300,000 residents survive. More realistically, the history of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising provide hope to how its restored participants' sense of dignity, how it may inspire other more directly successful Jewish revolt. The vessels write that the uprising was a struggle to assert Jewish dignity, more simply human dignity in the face of extermination. Writing in history, Eric Blackmore notes the news of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising inspired the revolts at the Treblinka and survivor camps. As discussed below, these revolts succeeded in shutting down the camps and liberating hundreds of inmates, about 160 who would survive. Resistance in the forests and towns. Some Jews fought outside of the ghettos, often hiding in the forest in between their attacks. At least 15,000 Jewish militants lived and fought in the woods of Lithuania, Eastern Poland, and the Western USSR. A communist ban in Belgium derailed an Auschwitz-bound train of April 19, 1943, allowing several hundred prisoners to escape. On August 1, 1944, the Polish resistance launched a 63-day uprising in Warsaw. Participants included the Jewish pundit who had fought the prior year in the ghetto. Two anarchist leading groups also participated in the Warsaw uprising. The Polish Syndicalist Union had 2,000 to 4,000 members, and the Freedom Syndicalist organization had several hundred members. Wearing red and black bands, the 200 CSP soldiers fought in the 101st Syndicalist Company. Midway through the uprising in September, this formation joined with SOW soldiers and formed the Syndicalist Brigade. Resistance in the camps. In western and central Poland, armed resistance units sit in 70 concentration and extermination camps. These camps were death factories where prisoners were forced to perform hard labor in some of history's most inhumane conditions until they were shot or gassed to death. An estimated 3 million Jews were killed in these camps, comprising about half of the Jews' total death during the Nazi Holocaust. In August 1943, inmates at the Treblinka extermination camp rose up and caused so much damage that the camp was not rebuilt. 300 inmates escaped, and 100 of them survived a manhunt. On October 14, 1943, inmates at the Sobibor extermination camp revolted and killed nearly 1,000 Nazi officers with hatchets. 400 of the camp's 600 inmates escaped. Most died from mines or were killed, but 60 survived and joined the Soviet partisan. 2 days later, Himmler ordered the camp to be closed down. On October 1944, inmates in Auschwitz extermination camp revolted and destroyed a crematorium. Confronting passivity and collaboration. Facing intense physical and psychological intimidation, the official Jewish leadership most often took a stance of passivity or collaboration. This was an almost complete lack of resistance, according to the historian Rolf Hilberg. Insofar as there was a resistance, it was mainly nonviolent throughout the 1930s. Nazi-sanctioned Jewish council known as Judenrat participated in the operation of rounding up Jews and sending them to death camps. Hannah Arendt observed the Jewish leaders almost without exception cooperate in one way or another for one reason or another with the Nazis. According to the former Judenrat member Pinchas Frilker, half of the murders of Jews could have been avoided if Jews had not allowed the council's constructions. instructions. In Czechoslovakia, the council went even beyond Nazi's orders and decided to proactively prevent new Jewish births. There, the Judenrat used threats to make Jewish women get abortion, and in one case, they even assisted a nurse in killing a newborn Jewish child. More than two-thirds of the Judenrats were supporters of Zionism. The Zionist literature were among the most treacherous of all. The movement shared with Nazism a belief that Jews did not belong in Europe. On June 21, 1933, the Zionist Federation of Germany sent the Nazi Party an official memo saying, "We Jews are against mixed marriage and for maintaining the purity of the Jewish group. For its practical aims, Zionism hoped to be able to win the collaboration even of the government's fundamental hostility to Jews." The Federation newspaper urged Jews to respect racial consciousness and the racial interests of the German absolute. The paper also published a Nazi statement saying that the Nuremberg law stripping Jews of citizenship and prohibiting their intimacy with non-Jews were both beneficial and regenerative for Judaism as well. An editor later admitted that paper sometimes went too far in its approval of the nationalist state. The Federation affiliated with the World Zionist Organization and the supporter of WCO's August 1933 pact with Nazi Germany. Through this act, known as the Transfer Agreement, the Zionists brought German goods and sold them in Palestine. While Jews were already allowed to leave Germany, the pact allowed them to transfer capital. Most Jews worldwide opposed the pact because it scabbed on an international boycott of Germany led by Jews and leftists. The lack of resistance was not entirely the fault of the leadership. One impediment to resistance was the many Jews that had deeply internalized the anti-Semitic attitudes on the dominant culture within the camps. Most of the longtime prisoners eventually believed in the superiority of the German race. According to camp survivor and psychologist Bruno Betterman, prisoners were even scavenged pieces of scrap metal to help the Nazi war effort, and they complained when journalists exposed the concentration camps in foreign newspapers. Within the ghettos, according to the Jewish militant Shmuel Preslow, many Jews held a dream to be like the Germans, handsome, strong, and self-confident. Overall, passivity and nonviolence failed to stop or slow down the Nazi extermination of Jews and other targets. On this history, American Indian movement militant Ward Churchill commented, "The Jews' experience revealed with stark clarity the basic logic and the core of pacifist conception of morality and political action."